Hello and welcome to the Mythic Imperator Margok video guide. I'm your host Babyjace. Imperator Margok is quite a step up in difficulty compared to the previous 6 bosses in the Highmaul raid, so make sure you bring your best game to this boss as he will not be a pushover. Imperator Margok is a 4-phase, 2 intermission fight, so it is going to be a very long fight. Our first kill was almost 16 minutes long. For your raid comp, you can use multiple different comps depending on what's best for your group. We personally went with 3 tanks, 5 healers, and 12 DPS, but you can always opt to run 2 tanks or 6 healers instead. I will be explaining this fight phase by phase. To begin with, phase 1 is going to be the easiest Margok phase that you're going to encounter in this fight. All of Imperator's abilities are going to be the same as they were on Heroic, with the exception that he's going to have 2 runestones activated, which means that each ability will have 2 abilities added onto them instead of the usual 1. We're going to be going over each ability and what they do. So the way the mine works in phase 1 is that it will grow double in size over 30 seconds, and that it will, when it expires, it's going to duplicate and create 2 new fresh mines that will also grow in size and will also duplicate themselves when they expire. So you're going to have a lot of mines behind you, so you just need to keep going in a clockwise and a counterclockwise fashion, and do not even attempt to go behind you, because there's going to just be tons of mines there, and they're going to be splitting everywhere, and just you cannot hit mines in this fight. Hitting a mine in this fight is almost always going to result in a wipe. Very rarely did we not wipe when a mine was hit. What you're going to do for the branded debuff is, branded in this fight needs to be handled very properly. So once the branded hits 5 stacks, that's when you're going to want to be dropping it off in this phase. And the way branded in this phase is going to work, he's going to put it on 2 of players, just 2 players, and he's also going to make it so that wherever you got branded, you cannot move more than 10 yards away from that location. You're going to see a circle, and once you hit the edge of that circle and go past that, you're going to be teleported right back into the middle. Now it's important that you don't do that, because sometimes you will get teleported back into the middle and there's a mine there, and you will trigger that mine. This is very important that you don't get pushed back out of the circle and you don't get knocked out of the circle from the ad dying, or you will be teleported back into the center and potentially kill people by hitting a mine, or you might pass your branded onto other people when you're trying to drop it off at 5 stacks. Now when you do get 5 stacks, you want to go to the edge of your circle and have everyone else just move away from you. You just move 15 yards away from them. So it's very important that it drops at 5 stacks. A 6 stack of brand will probably kill your raid, or kill whoever it goes on, and then it'll just keep bouncing. It's just really bad. The next ability that you're going to have to deal with is Force Nova. It's incredibly important that your melee deal with Force Nova correctly, as it's the easiest way for melee to die in this phase. As he starts casting Force Nova, or a few seconds before, position yourself so that you are not standing within 4 yards of any other melee player, and take care that you won't be knocked back into a mine. If you are stacked on the boss when this goes out, you will be knocked away, so you will want to move away from the boss slightly to avoid this knockback. The range here will also need to be spread out so that they don't splash on each other. If melee or range are cleaving on each other, there's a high chance that one of them will die. You can avoid this splash damage by using several abilities, AMS, Cloak, as well as skipping the Nova entirely with Blink, Displacer Beast, Warlock Self-Port, Transcendence, and Disengage. The next ability that the boss is going to be using is he will summon an Arcane Aberration throughout this phase, and throughout the fight in general. Damage on this ad will always take top priority over damage on the boss. It needs to die. The ad will do a pulsing AoE damage to the entire raid, and it will pretty much be your biggest source of damage that your raid will take throughout the fight. Like, this ad has to die as soon as you possibly can. Now, note in phase 1 that when you do kill this ad, it will cause a knockback to everyone in the raid, so do not get knocked back into a mine, do not get knocked back into the edge of your branded and get teleported back in the middle and trigger a mine, stuff like that. Very, very, very important that you do not do that. You just need to kill this ad. When it does die, in phase 1, it will spawn 7 smaller ads, and all these ads do need to be picked up by your 3rd tank, or the tank who's not taking Mark of Chaos. It is recommended that you're probably going to want to assign specific classes to AoE or cleave off of these ads, or off of the boss onto these ads. It can't be a big single target DPS loss, because you do need to push the boss as soon as you can. So for example, classes like Unholy Death Knights, Blood Death Knights, Enhancement Shamans, these are very good classes for dealing AoE damage to these ads, as they will still do quite a bit of damage to the boss. It's a very minimum boss DPS loss. Now the goal is to properly deal with the adds in a timely manner while keeping as much DPS on the boss, as pushing him to the next phase is going to be very important. So as long as these adds die before the next add is summoned, you're in good shape. The next and final ability in this phase is Mark of Chaos, which is going to be a tank only ability. Whichever tank you assign to take every Mark of Chaos will want to make sure that as soon as the boss teleports him to the range pile, he does his best to get at least 35 yards away from everyone in the raid. Generally, you will want to go to the opposite side of the room from where your ranged were positioned at the start of the fight, as there should be no one close to that area. It's recommended that whichever tank takes Mark of Chaos has high mobility. The classes most suitable for this are going to be Warrior with Charge and Leap, Druids with Displacer Beast, and Monks with Transcendence and Roll. The intermissions of this fight are going to be the toughest learning curve your group will face in this encounter. Once you get the hang of what you need to do, it becomes drastically easier, but it will take a while before your group does finally pass this part of the fight. Everything works exactly like it did in normal and heroic of this fight, with one very crucial change. The Gorian War Mages will now gain a stacking buff for each successful cast of Nether Blast they get off, increasing the damage done by their Nether Blast ability by 25% per stack for 6 seconds. Now the key to dropping this is to have controlled interrupt abilities being used on them. Unlike normal casts, once you interrupt these casts they will start over and cast again instead of being locked out for 4 seconds. What this means is, after letting them gain a certain amount of stacks, you will have to chain interrupt them in order to allow their buffs to drop, as they will chain gun their casts forever. What we did is assigned one melee group and one range group consisting of 2 melee and 3 range to each of the War Mages, as well as having 2 to 3 backups per group. Once the War Mages gained 3 stacks, the melee group would start interrupting them, making sure to interrupt at the last possible millisecond of the cast in order to buy time for the debuff to drop. If both melee do this, the buff should drop off milliseconds before it's applied again at a fresh 1 stack, and his damage will be reduced significantly. It is very important that if you mess up your interrupts, you must have the range start their interrupts immediately instead of waiting for them to go back up to 3 stacks, as they will start killing people with high stacks. The only thing that works on the War Mages is regular interrupts and Blood Elf silences. No other blanket silence will work on these adds. It must say that it interrupts. Once the melee groups finishes their interrupts, let them get back up to 3 and start with the range group, interrupting so that the stacks drop again. Please note, however, that if your group manages to fail your kick interrupts and it keeps stacking, do not bother trying to interrupt it with just 1 interrupt. It will do you no good. You must chain interrupts to get them to drop it. Wasting interrupts here and there is only going to cause a wipe, and it will do nothing to help you. For our group, we found it was beneficial to death grip a War Mage to the center of the room and tank the volatile anomalies on top of it in order to allow our tanks and enhancement shaman to cleave off of the War Mage and onto the adds. Your healers will want to have healer CDs set up for this phase to top people off when the adds start exploding. If your group starts feeling overwhelmed or you're taking too much damage, stop AoE and move the little adds under the boss so that they are no longer being cleaved, and tank them there for the rest of the intermission. All DPS needs to be on one of the War Mages, as that makes interrupting much easier when the first one actually dies. To achieve this while still interrupting the ranged one, you will need 2 melee on it, as well as the ranged who are assigned to interrupt it need to have a focus macro and a focus kick macro. You will also need a focus target cast bar so you can see when the ad is casting. It's crucial you do this, as you will need all the damage you can get on the main War Mage that you are killing. Once the first War Mage dies, go ahead and grip the second one in and repeat the process. Once all the War Mages are dead, go ahead and group all the volatile anomalies together in the group and AoE them down with healing cooldowns. For our group, we use Disc Priest Barrier, Spirit Link Totem, and Smoke Bomb to allow us to all AoE the anomalies. So for in this phase, you're going to want to be stacking all the ranged on top of each other with the melee and the boss in the center. Each time a mine is going to be placed on the range, you're just going to want to move in a clockwise fashion around the room. You don't want to move too fast or too far away from the mine. If you move too far away from the mine, you're going to be finding yourself running out of room. Remember, these mines last for 2 minutes and they grow twice as big. So it's very important that you use your room wisely. Mines in this phase are very simple. They're going to last twice as long, and they're going to grow twice as big before the phase ends. So the main difficulty in the mines is not so much them being near you, it's that as you're making your loop around the room, you might find that mines are ahead of you, and that could be a problem. So for what we did is whenever there was a mine in front of us, we would just double back and we would go the ranged group would just go behind mines, and that was usually perfectly okay. And it's actually advised because when he transitions, you get more damage on the boss. So the next thing you're going to be dealing with is the Arcane Aberration that the boss summons. Just like in Phase 1, upon death, this ad will knock back everyone in the raid, and so you really need to make sure that you're not getting knocked back into a mine, and you're not being knocked back into branded. Both things are very important. Now, when the ad does die, he will no longer summon 7 small ads, but he now has 75% more health and can no longer be crowd controlled. This means you can't grip it into the melee, and you can't stun it or anything like that, and he just lasts longer. He's going to do more AoE damage to the raid, and you might want to set up raid CDs for each ad, as it does quite a bit of damage, and it's going to be a massive amount of damage that your entire raid is going to be taking in this phase. So the next ability that you're going to be dealing with is Force Nova. In this phase, Force Nova will no longer cause you to deal splash damage to everyone within 4 yards. Instead, Force Nova will now trigger an additional 2 times over 16 seconds. This is not really too big of a deal. Like, it's not really going to kill you. It's just really annoying for melee because you're going to be constantly knocked back. Just make sure you're not getting knocked back into the mine, you're not getting knocked back into the Mark of Chaos range, and you're not getting knocked back into the branded range. These are 3 things that you need to absolutely watch out for. If you get knocked back into any of these things, you will probably cause a wipe, as the branded will start jumping through melee and it'll start one-shotting people one by one. The mine will obviously probably kill you and probably kill someone else, and the Mark of Chaos will instantly kill you unless you have like Bubble or something like that. The next ability that you're going to be dealing with here is the Mark of Chaos. This is, again, a tank-only ability. There's pretty much nothing you can do about this ability. You are going to be teleported to a ranged pile and you're going to be rooted. You just sit there. You just sit there and you wait for it to expire, and then you get back into the tank. It's up to everyone else to not get hit. That's pretty much all there is to this mechanic. Note, however, for the ranged, right before a Mark of Chaos comes out, you don't want to be standing right next to a mine. These mines do get bigger, and if you teleport the tank right next to a mine that's getting bigger, you run the risk of that tank actually exploding the mine. This did happen to us 2 to 3 times on progression, so this is something to note. Just don't be stacked right next to the mine, as it's going to get bigger, and that's such a silly way to wipe. You just don't want to wipe that way. Brandon in this phase is very important to get correctly, as minor errors will most likely result in a raid wipe. You'll want to assign 1 healer and 1 ranged DPS to deal with the debuff for the entirety of the phase. We use the Disc Priest and a Warlock due to strong personal CDs and mobility. As the transition phase ends, the branded team will only have a few seconds before the first debuff is spawned. It's best to position yourself between the melee and the ranged group to grab branded at 2 stacks. 3 is okay, but anything over 3 is most likely going to wipe your group or complicate the raid positioning for the rest of the phase. Like in normal and heroic, branded will always jump to the closest raider within its current range depending on stack number. Each stack of the branded will now cut down by 25% instead of 50% in this phase on Mythic, as well as have a 10-yard leash on wherever you were given branded. If nobody is in range, the debuff will fall off. It's optimal to drop branded off at 7 stacks. However, there are cases where you might have to make a judgment call and drop it at 8 stacks if your raid is too close or you get cut off by a bad mine placement. As soon as branded is applied to a raid member, they need to move out to the left and meet up with your soak team, as I explained earlier. It's very important to get branded out immediately so your soak group has time to get away. A lot of our phase 2 wipes were due to branded jumping around the melee and range group too long, causing the branded team to take too many stacks. The branded team must trade the debuff off, leading the range group to the next stack point. Stack 3 and 4 should be done with caution, as your ranged melee group will still be close enough to grab the debuff back. Stacks 5 and 7 should be larger jumps, allowing the debuff to easily drop off every time. Make sure you use a defensive CD for stacks 5, 6, and 7, as they will hit for an average of 150 to 300k damage. Please note, melee and range, that if the ad dies, it knocks you back in the range of the branded and it jumps back into the group, it will almost always cause a wipe. Same with the Force Nova. There is no real change to Intermission 2 other than the spawning of the one extra mob, the Reaver. Positioning is slightly changed as well. Depending on your raid comp is how this intermission should be handled. I will explain how we handled it as you will see how we do it here. You will want to tank the Reaver in the middle with the smaller adds. You do not grip the War Mage as you did in Intermission 1. You will want to assign some melee to take care of interrupting the War Mage that is not being focused, while the rest of the raid focuses on the other War Mage. If you have an enhancement shaman in your raid, you would want the shaman to also be cleaving the smaller adds by the Reaver. However, the shaman needs to be on the War Mages as well. Also aiding with the smaller adds would be Moonkins that are using Starfall, as well as the Blood Death Knight who will be helping to tank them. The goal is to have them die quickly, however staggered. The best way I found to achieve this was to have an enhancement shaman using Fire Nova with the Moonkin using Starfall, while I Death Strike the lower health mobs in order for them to die in a staggered manner. If you feel too many are dying and your healers cannot keep up, go ahead and call out stop DPS. It's very important that you do not over AoE and wipe. Once the War Mages are dead, you want to AoE the remaining small adds with raid cooldowns to help with healing and survivability, as well as kill the Reaver. The Reaver can be a huge threat due to the fact his kickback can trigger mines, so do not position yourself in a bad spot to avoid this happening. Keep in mind, however, that his frontal cleave and just as melee attacks can kill your tank, and they can also kill your raid, so make sure your healers and the tank currently tanking the Reaver are mindful of this and ask for cooldowns appropriately. Don't face the Reaver towards the raid, he has a frontal cleave. During this time, Imperator will drop back down and Phase 3 will begin. The quicker you kill the adds and Reaver and regain the health of your raid, the quicker everyone can get into Phase 3 positions. As we move into Phase 3, this will seem to be difficult as well as overly hectic and chaotic for most guilds, but once you've learned the basics of this phase, it will prove to be easier than Phase 2 was. The main challenge in this phase will be the overall damage output from the splash damage in melee, as well as the tank whom will be in charge of the smaller adds. In Phase 3, another thing that is key will be positioning. You will want your range to be spread out in a semicircle around the room, with melee and the boss in the center. The difficulty for range in this phase will be from the mines that come in the later portions of this phase, as later on in the fight the mines become more and more populated around. The mines in this phase will duplicate when they expire, and they last twice as long, so the room is going to fill up towards the end. It's important that you stay away from the area that you will be taking the branded debuff, and where the tank will take his Mark of Chaos, as there needs to be no mines there. Note the mines will no longer grow in size. Next is the Arcane Aberration that the boss will continue to summon throughout the phase, just as he did in previous phases. However, this time, he no longer does a knockback upon his death. In turn, now when he dies, he will summon 7 smaller adds who will have 75% more health and deal even more damage. The tank responsible for tanking these adds will need to rotate cooldowns as well as know when to ask for an external or two. The add tank will be taking the brunt of the damage during this time. It is imperative that the healers are aware of this and understand when to properly switch to him when these adds are out. It is recommended that the tank assigned to this task is a Blood Death Knight, as they can anti-magic shell the first set of Force Novas to immune the splash damage and auto attacks from the smaller adds, as the smaller adds do not deal physical damage with their auto attacks, it is instead arcane damage. Another recommendation would be if you have a rep paladin, their paladin should spec into double Hand of Sacrifice and use Hand of Sacrifice right before the second pulse of Force Nova, so that it will also be up for the third pulse of Force Nova. These small adds must die, and while they are out, they become the top priority for damage. Leaving them alive too long will result in the tank running out of cooldowns, or the healers just using way too much mana keeping the tank alive. Both cases hurt the raid, as the tank may die, and thus the raid wiping, and your healers running the risk of running out of mana. Force Nova is much more important now in this phase, as it continues to pulse out every 8 seconds for a total of 3 Force Novas. But in addition to that, it will also cause players to do splash damage to everyone that is within 4 yards of each other. For range, this won't really be too big of a problem, as they should be spread out right before this goes out. As for melee, however, this will be one of Melee's most difficult abilities to deal with, and it will be the biggest contributor to melee deaths. Melee will need to ensure that they are spread evenly and assigned to places that they can go to, relative to the boss's position. Once he begins casting, or about 1 to 2 seconds before, you will want your melee to get out of melee range and get to a safe spot, so that they don't deal splash damage to each other, and pretty much kill each other. Damage taken here is far more important than damage you are dealing, so please just run out, be safe, don't die. It's very important. It is important to note that whoever is also tanking the adds at this time, the melee must be completely away from this player, as you will deal splash damage to this tank and it will probably kill him. It's like super important that you do not splash on this tank, as it will kill him or get him very close to dying and having him use extra cooldowns, which he needs to be saving. If the tank does die, you can probably have your second tank pick up all the adds, but just be aware it is a lot of damage that they will be taking, and it will probably cause the wipe. If you super emphasize this mechanic in your boss mods, it will make it that much easier for the melee to deal with, as you will get a 5-second cooldown for each Force Nova. Branded in this phase is going to work slightly differently than the earlier phases, and it's very important that you handle these properly, or just like before, they will quickly cause deaths and wipes. Branded finally loses its 10-yard leash, but now it will go out on 2 people, as well as reduce in range by 25% instead of 50%. We found the easiest way to deal with this mechanic was to take both Brandeds to the melee, and let it sit there until the 5th stack. Once melee got their 5th stack, it's very important that you take both of them and go out to range where 2 mages will be. Mages should be marked, and there should be a set area where the melee are going to run to give the branded to the mages. Once the mages get the branded, they are going to have to double blink out to a designated area and use Evanescence or Greater Invis so that they do not die upon the expiration of the 6th branded. You must get far away from the raid, as it still has a fairly large yard, so I think it's like 46 yards, so you definitely need to be getting decently far from the raid. Double blink should be good, but if not, you can use the mage speed boost, I believe. And finally, the last ability in this phase is Mark of Chaos, which is again a tank-only mechanic. In this phase, Mark of Chaos will no longer teleport your tank, but instead will cause your tank to be rooted in place. Your raid needs to keep a more attentive watch as to where the tank is, more so now than ever. Reason being is not only is your tank rooted, but as soon as the tank explodes, Orb of Chaos will shoot out in different directions based on where it was your tank was positioned. Half the orbs will be moving at a fast speed, while the other half will be moving much slower. These orbs will happen at the same time as the Force Nova, so it is very important that you dodge them, as you will probably die if you do get hit by one. The best tank classes for these mechanics are ones that can teleport away, such as Warriors with Leap, Monks with Transcendence Roll, and Druids with Displacer Beast. If you only have a Paladin and DK tank available, you can instead use Warlock Gateways to teleport yourself away from the boss. What this means is that every Mark of Chaos, the tank that did not take Mark of Chaos before will have to take it the second time, as the first tank will have a debuff preventing him from taking the Warlock Gateway. In order to handle this mechanic properly, your tank just needs to use their own ability or take the gateway before the boss finishes his cast, or you will be rooted right in melee and will almost 100% cause a wipe. Phase 4 is brand new on Mythic, as it does not exist on normal or heroic. This phase is incredibly easy, and it will only take you 2 to 5 pulls of getting here with everyone alive to kill Cho'Gall. Note, there is no information about this phase in the dungeon journal. Phase 4 begins at 5% health left on Imperator, with Cho'Gall coming into the back of the room and a ton of adds being spawned from both balconies. You must misdirect, have tanks pick up these adds, and rotate major cooldowns on the tank who has the most of the adds, as they will do a lot of damage. We found that using Army of the Dead in the designated add tank zone, generally the area where the tank took Mark of Chaos, made tanking these adds incredibly easy, as an unglyphed Army of the Dead will just keep taunting them while ranged and melee are AoEing them down. You might want to use Blessing of Protection on all of your healers so that they don't get aggro on the adds when they come streaming in. Once all the adds are dead, Cho'Gall will appear. You will only need one tank to tank Cho'Gall. The other tank or tanks will need to be taking care of the adds that he will summon throughout the rest of the encounter. This will occur every 30 seconds. The tank that will be taking care of Cho'Gall will need to kite along the outer ring. Ranged generally want to stay in the middle of the room, with melee DPSing behind the boss as usual. Tank the adds behind the boss at all times, and right before the adds die, just alert melee that they need to get away so they don't die, as the adds will leave behind void zones. Just keep dragging the boss forward along the circle and have melee be on the boss DPSing him. Periodically throughout the encounter, a Dark Star will be summoned at a random ranged location. It is very important that you run at least 25 yards away from the Dark Star, so that when it explodes, it does not kill someone soaking Gaze, who will then also explode, wiping the raid with him. The next ability you will have to deal with during this phase is Gaze of the Abyss. Cho'Gall will make copies of players where they stand, and for the remainder of the fight, these copies will stand there and continuously cast to the nearest player. Each cast will leave a stacking debuff on the player that they cast on. The easiest way to handle this mechanic is assigning 2 range per gaze shadow copy that appears. Reason for this is one range will soak up to 3 to 4 stacks, swap with the next range, and then the first range with 3 to 4 stacks needs to get to a safe spot that is not within 8 yards of anyone. When your debuff expires, you will inflict 310k damage to yourself and anyone within 8 yards of you. Use a personal CD so that you do not die. Note that even if you only soak 1 stack of this debuff, you will still explode for 310k damage, so it's important you are aware of everyone around you so that you do not kill people. Also note that towards the end of the fight, melee may need to help soak the Gaze of the Abyss, so just be prepared to do that. The next ability is Enveloping Night. This mechanic becomes trivial if the Infinite Darkness is handled properly. To explain what Enveloping Night does, every minute the boss will cause all of the Gaze of Abyss adds to explode for 100k shadow damage. Upon entering the phase and getting the first set of Gaze of the Abyss, along with the first set of the debuff Infinite Darkness, you will want to dispel the first 2 Infinite Darkness right before he casts Enveloping Night, so that no one will die to it. Make sure it's communicated who is getting dispelled and who is not. With the first 2 dispelled, the first set of Enveloping Darkness will cause little to no damage because of the 2 that you dispelled, and the shields that you will gain. All the while this is occurring, your healers will want to be building up the Infinite Darkness Absorb on the one that you did not dispel. Reason for this is the next occurring Enveloping Night will do much more damage because more of the Gaze of the Abyss adds will have spawned during the fight. Along with the absorbs your raid has gained with this, you will also want to use personal cooldown for the second Enveloping Night, as well as Devotion Aura and Rallying Cry. Please take note, during this phase, those holding on to the Infinite Darkness debuff cannot take unnecessary damage because they cannot be healed due to the fact that Infinite Darkness is absorbing those heals and will not allow you to regain your HP as long as it is on you. Take extra precaution that the Infinite Darkness target that you are saving for the second Enveloping Night is nowhere near Gaze of the Abyss targets or the range dealing with them, as you cannot take any damage with this debuff. That is it for Imperator Margok Mythic. If you enjoyed this guide and would like to see others, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you have any concerns or want to ask any questions, go ahead and leave a comment. I generally answer most comments that are left on videos. If that's all, have a good day.